This solves a lot for the Montreal Canadiens, as recent reports out of Colorado state that one of the recently acquired 2Cs is likely to hit the market, and there's a lot of talk about the Montreal Canadiens making a swoop in for Brock Nelson. We have to dive into what Nelson brings and the likelihood of him going to Montreal. Plus, we have an article from Bleacher Report sending one New York Rangers forward who's about to get on a big extension, a Quebecois boy, you might recognize him, to the Montreal Canadiens, and it's one of the craziest things I think we've seen yet this offseason. We got a lot of stuff to get into on this episode of Habs Digest, and Jesse, before we get into Brock Nelson, I want to start with this here, and this is talking about Alexis Lafreniere. Look, this is, I know, it's crazy. I read this. I'll link the article down below. No, not Nelson. It's from Adam Getz at Bleacher Report. He said, look, there's plenty of reasons in his recent article talking about destinations for Laf. He said, there's plenty of reasons why you could draw a line connecting the Habs and Lafreniere. Not only did Montreal take a huge step forward, but it's also going to be in the market for another top six winger that can score. At 24, he'd be an absolute fit into the current core of Montreal, still become an impact player alongside the likes of Suzuki and Caufield. And when you look at his stats, Jesse, they definitely don't jump off the page. He's a name that will probably be linked to Montreal until the end of time if there's ever any trade reports around him, just because Quebecois, former number one overall pick, a ton of hype. I don't get it. I don't. I just don't see how he actually fits into this lineup. I think if you're making a trade for Lafreniere, you're taking a massive gamble. I don't know your thoughts. I just don't see this as a fit. There's maybe not a whole lot to say on this, but like looking at this roster now, he's not a center. He's going to have a $7.5 million deal next year. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's definitely some cultural issues with the Rangers. So we need to preface all of this when we're looking, in that locker room, outside, all over the place, just with the New York Rangers organization. So maybe this is a player that could flourish in Montreal. That being said, he's really not like that 2C. There's no way that we're signing Lafreniere and then still having to deal with the contract situation of a 2C. It's just not a tiny bit of work for Kent Hughes. He already has like so much on his plate, really, without kind of looking into that situation. That being said, like with Lafreniere, he took a little bit of a bounce back last year, but still his production was still higher than his 3 first years in the NHL. Like there was still some growth there. Like he just really needs to get his goal production up. This is a player that I feel is going to take a bounce back and will get better. But just because it's not the position that the Montreal Canadiens need, even though we have seen him be clutch at certain points, we know in Montreal we love players like that, whether it's at the World Championships, a little bit in the playoffs, etc. For me, it's just with that contract again, starting the first year of 7, considering, not only kind of the long-term deals we have to our young core, but like deals that we haven't even given out to Hutson, to Demidov. Yeah, it's just way too much to kind of take on for not the right position. That being said, like I really expect this player to really still, as he's getting into his prime, to turn into a really amazing player in the NHL.
Yeah, and there's nothing against Lafreniere. I completely agree. I think he still has that potentially 6'2", 196, and we see him start to pick up the physicality. 2 years ago, he was physical, didn't have the production. Last year, started to produce a lot more, was less physical. This year, still produced a bit and was still pretty physical. Like there's lots of stuff that can still be done with Lafreniere, but again, like you said, Jesse, bringing in a $7.5 million deal for 7 years, or 7.45 million, whatever, into this roster when you still need to find a 2C, you still need to extend Lane Hutson, you still need to have all your young guys in the future. It just doesn't make sense to me. And even at a low price, I don't get it. I think Lafreniere, hopefully in a few years, will be awesome. I'd love to see him finally succeed. I just don't think the place is Montreal. We want to hear your guys' thoughts, though. I have a feeling there's going to be some yes, some no's down there, so we'd love to hear your thoughts down below. But, Jesse, we're going to transition into a guy that does solve a lot for Montreal, and that is Brock Nelson. Now, there's a lot of rumors flying around about him, about how he might want to go back home to Minnesota. But the big thing here is that, according to a recent report from Adrian Dater, it doesn't sound too promising that Brock Nelson will re-sign with the Avalanche as an unrestricted free agent. And this is very interesting to me, Jesse, because the Avalanche gave up a conditional first-round pick that will be a first-round pick either in 2026 or 27, a third-round pick, and their top prospect in Callum Ritchie for him. This is interesting. So now Brock Nelson's looking around, and when you look at his stats, like, unbelievable player. This guy's really a 30 goal scorer every year. He had a bit of a tough time when he first transitioned to Colorado this past year, but realistically, he's a 6'4", definitely a 2C with a history of scoring 30 goals, 60-ish points in a season. He is an awesome player. The question again would be term, Jesse. I mean, in terms of fit, I think there's almost no better fit than a guy like Brock Nelson, solid on the faceoff dot, lefty, big 6'4", a guy that can score you between 25 and 35 goals. My only worry is that he's 33. How long of a contract would you even be willing to offer him to try and pry him away from a team like Minnesota or Colorado who's really trying to bring him in as well?
I do 3 years. You know, Kent might be tempted to maybe do a 4-year deal there, but that's where it gets risky. Like bringing in a Brock Nelson as a stopgap at a 3-year. Like, let's talk about the ideal situation. Definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
And just as we're kind of looking at different centers around the league, like we need to think we're doing this on purpose because we know Kent Hughes thinks outside the box. We're trying to tap in to that mastermind right now that really he has when it comes to hockey and figure out like where is he gonna go next? Because it's funny, Josh, because it's like there's so many centers to go around, but at the same time, it's like we all feel like it's gonna be somebody we don't expect. Like Nelson, Horvat, Byfield, for kind of different reasons, are all players that really, maybe Barzell, you could kind of clump in, that seem like there's a really good chance that we could do something. Like, because again, the Avs are looking to make moves, not really having that success in the playoffs. The Jonathan Drouin curse, as I've spoken to you about, Josh, off camera, remains undefeated here. So, I mean, the Avs are looking to do something. And the reason we talk about these players is like, there's not many teams that have like the amount of cap space, the amount of picks, the amount of prospects, and then like the willingness where now you're getting your competition window where like so many of these different players are available. And for sure, like this is a player, he's had 3 years consistently of scoring 30 goals. Basically, when he's in the lineup, he's a very durable guy. You know, he's consistently like playing that two-way game because a lot of his production, remember, was with the Islanders. And they're playing like this defensive guy. Like this guy isn't a guy that like cheats to get offense. He's got an underrated shot, and I kind of like that, Josh, of like the complimentary part again with the faceoffs, the size, which I think is still important with Suzuki. Like he's got a good size, but bringing in a 2C with size is important. But like while Suzuki is very much a goal scorer, you got to look at him first primarily as a play nature
100%.
in his blood. Whereas Nelson, we know generally he's a little bit more of like a shoot first look, and I think that that kind of complements each other. You sometimes want those dynamics from your 1 and 2, see different ways of approaching the game. Lots of things to like. Obviously, the contract term, like, I don't know, like, obviously Kent's going to look at situations, and it's going to be very much dependent on that. Like, Josh, do you think he goes 4 years, or are we, like, hard capping it at 3 years if we are going for Nelson?
I mean, like, that's such a good question. Because, again, that comes to, like, the culmination of what this whole discussion is about. It's like, everyone's going to want him, right? Like, this guy fits in on pretty much every roster. The problem is not everyone's going to want to overpay for him. And you wonder if there's going to be a bidding war. Colorado definitely wants to keep him. They've had a revolving door of 2Cs as of late. And right now, it's looking like Charlie Coyle is going to be their 2C, which is maybe not ideal. He's making a lot of money, and he's only got 1 year left on his deal. But it seemed like Montreal, who's looking for a big guy who produces all the time, 6'4", solid on the dot. Again, like, there's not much that fits the profile better than Nelson. But for a young team, Jesse, again, this guy's not part of the long-term future, but like we've said before, some veteran players are going to be needed. A team like Minnesota's looking for a 2C. It's where he's from. There's been some mutual interest, but are they willing to go over 3 years? My big question is, Jesse, to answer your question, I think a hard cap at 3 if we're Montreal. And we know what Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton have said. It's like, we don't want to go out giving these crazy big deals, right? The problem is, I don't think that's going to be enough to lure him away from some other teams. Like, if Montreal versus Minnesota, if they each offer him a 3-year deal at a similar AAV, he might go to Minnesota. If Montreal offers him the extra year at the same AAV, that might be willing to pry him away. If you're Kent Hughes or Jeff Gorton, and it does come down to that, you do genuinely have a chance at Nelson. Like, we had a chance at Marchessault, remember? But we didn't want to go longer than 4 years. Nashville did. They got him, right? So if we're talking about that, would you take the risk for a guy that genuinely looks like a good 2C, even though it would take him to 37? My answer is, I don't think they would even take that risk just to bring him in, just to pry him away from another team.
No, and they've said often that in like, especially in free agency, like this situation, you're kind of paying knowing that sometimes in those later years that they're not quite performing. Like, you need to know that going in, there probably is going to be a fair amount of term, and that will play a huge part in this. So, but we know that Kent Hughes is like, while trade remains the most, not only the best option for the Montreal Canadiens because of all the picks and prospects, also the most likely for that reason. We need to look at free agency as well, because Kent Hughes, like, especially in a market like Montreal, where it sometimes it's harder to get those star players, you need to look to make your team by any means necessary. Now that means offer sheets, obviously trades, free agencies there. You know, Kent's guy, he's going to keep it still domestic. He's going to not get too wild with it, but he's definitely looking to improve this team, and really quickly, which is going to be fascinating to see.
I can't wait to see it. And we got to hear your guys' thoughts down below. And like, that's another thing, Jesse. We kind of threw not free agency out the window. I know people are talking about Bennett, but I feel like I forgot until recently that we did try to get Marchessault just last year. This kind of move is not off the table. So would love to hear your guys' thoughts on Nelson and Lafreniere. But listen, that'll do it. We're running out of time for this episode of Habs Digest. There's a lot to discuss. And hey, make sure you tune in tomorrow for a live stream. There's going to be a lot more discussion to be had there. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.